Luke Martin, voice of the Salukis. Appreciate you jumping on. How's the summer going? I know summer kind of slows down, but man, you got so much content in the works, and I'm sure you're just constantly thinking about what's next. So, how's it going so far?
Well, first off, Joe, good to be with you. Yeah, summer's changed a lot, especially in college athletics. I'd say over probably the last 3 to 4 years, where summer access for basketball has become more, in the headlines and more what fans are really clamoring. Of course, our fan base, being Saluki Nation basketball is no doubt a priority year round. But now in the summer, when the guys are here, I mean, seasons no longer really start in September.
Yep.
They're going now really full speed ahead, practicing 5 days a week. So as you kind of alluded to, I've been doing a summer access series this summer, did it last summer as well with Coach Nagy in my first full summer here on the job, and just a good time to be around him. It's still I don't want to say it's a high stress time, but it's still a level of importance time for them and getting to know their new teammates and getting to know their new coaches. But it's been fun. And it's always great just to try to build those relationships and get acclimated because once we get to late July here in less than a month, when football camp starts, that's kind of the that's kind of the event where it's like, all right, we're locked into this thing
It's
all the
go
way through
time.
till the end of baseball.
Yeah, no, I got you. Well, how do you feel like the transition's gone for you, Luke, coming from Indiana State? Obviously, you kind of knew the Salukis. I know you've been around the program for a while. Got to know Mike before you kind of took over for him. You feel like you're part of Saluki Nation now, right? Like you're not the new guy anymore.
No, and I
Yeah.
mean, Joe, it's hard for me to even wrap my head around that going into year three.
Yeah.
In some ways, it kind of feels like I just got here. In other ways, it also feels like I've been here a long time. And I think the reason I feel that way is because of the relationships that I've been able to build, not just with our coaches and our athletes, but tons of diehard Saluki fans and really getting ingrained in the community and learning even more. I mean, I've known about SIU, as you mentioned, my previous stop at Indiana State. I've understood for the most part what Saluki Nation was about and how important Saluki athletics were. But once I've been a part of it now and going on my third full year within the athletic department as the voice of the Salukis, it really has been it was a move that I didn't expect at any point. It was one of those things that came in terms of timing at the right time for me in terms of my career path. And when taking over, the respect level for Mike is through the roof. I mean, there's a reason he's in the Hall of Fame. There's a reason he's in multiple Hall of Fames, let alone the Saluki Hall of Fame. And when someone's had a job for that long, especially in this role for 45 plus years, it is going to be different. And the one thing I just have tried to do among many things is just be myself and not try to mimic Mike. Were there things that Mike did that set up a Hall of Fame career? Absolutely. And there's some of those traits I hope I have, but also that was Mike and that was his style and kind of his career path. And the way his career took off is a completely different time than when I'm coming up through the ranks. And a lot of it has to do with our social media strategy and all the different content that we do outside of just calling games. But it comes down to still the art of the job is when you're on radio, painting a picture. And I hope that I do that to the Saluki standards that have been set for years and years and years. But there was no doubt some nerves, Joe, at the start of, okay, like, how do you do this? But how can you step into a role like this? But it's really more just trying to be yourself and creating your own path.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I know Tim talking through what that search committee was looking for, when it's time to replace Mike, 90 something broadcasters, they were looking through the tape and the reels. I mean, I help job seekers kind of on some other stuff I do, so I know how competitive the search is and how like just frustrating that can be. What did it mean to you that you broke through that many competitors? That had to mean something.
It meant a ton,
Yeah.
Joe. And this industry, I don't want to say it's unique than any other industry. Um, but the job process for play-by-play jobs is very unique. And,
Yeah.
and and really when it comes down to it, you mentioned the 90 applicants. For the most part, you can chime through and you go through and you listen and you try to find that sound. When you really get down to the nitty gritty, when you're narrowing your list down to 5 candidates or 10 candidates, when you get to that point, especially at this level for these pristine jobs, those candidates can do the job.
Yeah.
They can do play by play. They check those boxes. It's just, are you a right fit, personality wise? The other duties as assigned. What do you want from this position? And that's where going through the process. It's like, okay, I have a good idea of what I can bring. I know my skill set. I credit my undergrad days at Ball State and really how that program was structured. There are tons of guys I went to school with, Connor Onion being one, who was a Saluki announcer as well, now doing Fox Sports big
Yep.
time. Connor was right there with me where we both have been in a producer's shoes. We filled roles when we were in college to really, yes, we wanted to be announcers, but when you get to learn in other positions throughout a control room, you have a greater appreciation for once you're in the announcer chair. And we credit the Ball State Sports Link program. And when I say we, Connor and all the alums I know do, and setting us up, for example. So to get through when you're finally in, and I've been through interview processes. One was with my alma mater as well, Ball State, when that job opened. And it's not easy when you don't get those jobs.
No. Yeah.
You have to stay at it. You have to continue to, work on ways that you can better not just sell yourself, but also just get better with experience. And I was very thankful for great years at Indiana State. It was a tremendous training ground for me. And I wouldn't be here without those previous experiences.
Yeah. I love it. And I know you said you weren't trying to mimic Mike. I've heard from multiple people. I've heard it sometimes in my own, just in terms of you guys do have a similar, I don't know if it's an inflection or, and it's your own unique style. I mean, have you heard that? I had lunch with Mike and he's heard that too, and he kind of laughed it off. But how many times have you heard that, and how does that get old?
I have. There have been multiple people that have come up to me and they'll be like, "Man, I feel like you sound just like Reese."
Yeah.
And look, I think when you're in the industry, Joe, it's just like anything. When you become what you hope to be, whether an expert or just when you live it every day, when you know the nuances, you pick up on those nuances more than just a casual
Yeah.
fan.
Yep.
And but to me, that like it's a great honor when people say that because, and I'm not just saying it because I took over for Mike, but Mike was always one of the best, even in his last years of doing the job. You always knew where the ball was, you always knew the score, and
Yeah.
you always knew how much time was left in the game. Everyone likes to complicate this job from time to time, Joe, and everybody thinks it can be an easy job too. And sometimes we can overcomplicate it. But really the one thing you have to do, as basic as it sounds, it's not it's because there's so much you can get caught up in terms of a game day environment, especially with football and basketball, where our environments can really be off the charts and can be a lot of fun, especially when you go on your buy games into all of these different, BYU for football last year. I know you were
Awesome.
there. Like
Yeah.
it was a tremendous environment, but at the end of the day, you got to say who's got the ball, where the ball is at, time and score, and all the important things that come into it. But that's what Mike was top of the line Hall of Fame mark was you knew when you were listening to the game where the ball was on the floor, not just going left or right, like at the free throw line, at the
Yeah.
nail, near wing, far wing, across the Saluki dog, all of those different details that you try to bring. That's where I hope when people go, man, Mike was really good at that. I hope people that have been to Banterra and watch our games, if they listen to a game on the radio, they know exactly the small little details that we try to bring up. Same thing at Saluki Stadium.
Yeah. No, exactly. I love the detail you give over the air. I think that makes a big difference. So, Indiana State, obviously, that you got to know the Salukis, but I was reading even before that, was it eighth grade? You were over hanging out at Purdue. You
Yeah.
run into at least Matt Painter. Like, I mean, it's just funny how things work out. You didn't know you were getting exposure to former Salukis at that point, but it is funny just to kind of see those threads. What do you remember about that? That seemed like that was pretty big, left a mark on you and kind of had you going on that path.
Yeah, it was. And I've never actually, because we did a podcast last summer with Coach Painter and he was tremendously classy and was awesome to work with when we did a roundtable with him, Bruce Weber, Rodney Watson, and Chris Lowry. It was one of the all-time great just Zoom sessions that I've been a part of because Joe, as you know, when you do these things, the ones where you just get to sit back and let people talk that love
Yeah.
the ramble, like I'm kind of doing right now with you, that makes it pretty easy. But that was really the time when I knew this is truly what I wanted to do. And Larry Clisby is who I was job shadowing. And unfortunately, I lost Cliz a couple years ago now to cancer, and Cliz was a major impact in my life, especially when it comes to wanting to be a broadcaster. So many times when I would be going to bed as a kid, when my dad wouldn't stay up to watch Purdue games, I would listen to Cliz as I would go to sleep and
Yeah.
try to keep the radio down quiet to where he wouldn't know I was still listening to the game.
Yeah. Smart.
So having the opportunity to job shadow Cliz and it seems, I guess, a little corny, Joe, but like it was seeing how Cliz interacted with the players. It was just him sitting in the coach's locker room with Coach Painter before the game. And it wasn't even the recorded interview segment they did. It was the jokes that they would jab at each other and just the environment, and you're like, this is cool.
Yeah.
Like
Exactly.
the game part, that's awesome, but it's the relationships you built behind the scenes. And I really do. It's easy to get caught up in stresses and the demands because the demands for all of our jobs are not going down. They're going to continue to go up.
Yep.
But I always try to just remind myself, whether it's being out of practice, especially games, but just having the opportunity to interact with our coaches and our athletes like I interacted and saw Cliz interact with those guys that day. Robbie Hummel was on that Purdue team, it was a really good Purdue team. And just seeing those interactions, like, man, that would just be so awesome to have that type of opportunity to do that. And now I get to do it. That's what makes it special and why I really enjoy being around it. It's those relationships you get to build with those guys.
Yeah, I love it. Obviously, great on the radio. I think a lot of people love to also see the live stream thing. And I mean, you're in the game. It feels like you want to grab a ball and go like dunk it or pass it or do something with it. How much does that help you? Like to move? And I mean, is that something you've always done? Is that something you picked up on? That has to help.
Yeah, no, it does. It's the behind the mic, which is what you're referring to. We started that last year, and a lot of Learfield schools do it.
Yep.
And really, once the game starts, you really kind of forget that they're there. For me, the one game that vividly comes back, and what was neat was Coach Hill's response to me after we came back and beat Youngstown State this
Yep.
past year in football, and the
Yep.
dramatic comeback and the emotions of it. And that's where for me, Joe, it's not, you know, it's more of that to me is what's so important about the job that I hold is you try your best to be, you don't want to be, you want to be a trustworthy source. You don't want to say, hey, this is the greatest thing to happen when it's not the greatest thing to happen. You want your voice and you want what your words are. When you say them, you want them to matter. And when something big is happening, you want your fans to understand, wow, this is maybe not the norm.
Right.
If every play you called was like the most spectacular play of all time, and early on in my career, I would say that was something I had to learn. I'm a shocker, high energy guy. It's just kind of part of my DNA. But I had to learn to at least a little, to be like, all right, hey, pick and choose your moments. Don't wear people out on the first drive of the first quarter, especially when it comes to football. It's a long game. You
Yep.
gotta you gotta keep people engaged. Uh, it's just a long about way to say, Joe, just that is the connection that you just try to feel with your fans, and not just them. That's why I go to practice and I spend as much time around our teams at practice, on the road, at the hotel, whatever the case may be, because I want to get to know them. So when DJ Williams busts a big play, it's not just DJ Williams, our quarterback. It's DJ Williams, the guy that I sweated my rear end off in 100+ degree weather
Yep.
in August every day at fall camp. Now he's putting in way more work than I am in terms of how
Still
he's going to
hot
play on
though.
the
Yeah.
But yeah, it's still hot, but like it's that bond you build. And when the guys see you there every day, that kind of also gets into Joe, not really your question, but it's look, there are times where post games where games just don't go well, right? And look, there are obvious questions that you have to ask. And those conversations are much easier when they know you're there.
Yep.
And not just there on game day, but when they see you at practice and they understand that they see you put the work in behind the scenes, they know that question, even though it may be hard to hear and hard to ask and not easy to answer, they know it's coming from a really good spot. And again, it's a lot of things that don't necessarily get taught, but that's kind of how my style has been developed and how you earn that trust. Because at the end of the day, Coach Hill knows these are Coach Hill, Coach Nagy, Coach Rhodes with baseball, Coach Sewell softball. I mean, I can go through them all. They know those are big boy, big girl jobs,
Oh yeah.
and they're accountable. And there's going to be times where they know they make mistakes and have to speak on them. But I think that's why that building that connection in every way you can makes those conversations way more easier than what they could be if you aren't as active around them.
No, I think that's great. I kind of noticed just from an outsider's perspective, the relationship with Nagy evolving last year because he was brand new.
Yeah.
Everybody was kind of learning him, and post game, some of those weren't the most comfortable, I'm sure, but you kind of felt like the mutual respect was building as the season went. So I love that stuff. Um, Matt, great on the radio. I think you're way more than a radio guy, and I know you're not comfortable with praise probably, but I think you're just a great storyteller, man. I think it's that trust, it's the research you put in, it's the time you spend with these guys. I feel like you have a really good understanding of how to bring people through a story. Is that something you work on actively? Is that something you just natural with? Because some people just have it. How do you work on that? How do you improve that craft? If you were talking to a kid who's kind of looking to come up in this business.
Yeah, it's a great question, Joe, and the way you word it, and it's how I really try to describe myself too, is even though the biggest joy of the job for me is the unpredictability on game day and the highs and lows.
Yep.
Um, you know, man, when the Salukis win and it's an all-time like that Youngstown State game coming back, I could care less what our record was. That feeling of right after the game is euphoria. And you wish you could bottle it up and savor it. Same thing when you hit 10 home runs in a game with baseball this past spring and you come up short in the Valley tournament,
Yep.
you are just in the dumps, trying to lay out, man, this is tough because you feel for those guys. I think, if I was talking to prospective students, it's not totally all gifted. I think these are all traits that can be learned, but you only learn it by actually doing it, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. Like we all can watch YouTube tutorials and figure out how to edit. And I use Adobe Premiere a lot for the video projects that I use. But I would just say like I think I'm a pretty basic video editor, but your camera is also the tool. It's when I'm talking with Coach Nagy or if I'm talking to Isaiah Stafford, yeah, I mean, I can do just a two camera shot of me and Isaiah, and I know the interview content will be good. I'll have, creative questions, find ways to engage him, but what more can you do to enhance it? Can you show him in practice? Can you show him stretching? Can you show shots he's making in practice? And can there be the visual element as well? It's not just the audio element. We put most of our interviews on our podcast platform, but I've also tried over the last year, especially to not just record and capture the audio, but can we have a video element, even if it's very small? You're kind of alluding to our behind the mics. Like, yeah, I mean, I can just post our audio calls of games, but now you get to see the visual of me and Coach Watson for basketball, me and Mike Trude for football, and Coach Poor down on the field. Just adds another layer to it. Um, for me, it's just I knew to me it was just a tremendous blessing for me that I really knew in high school that this was really my path. and a path that I wanted to go down. So I got heavily involved in the television production program at Columbus East, which then led me to going on visits. We were big Purdue fans growing up, so I remember going to Purdue, and they were like, "Hey, we're glad you want to come here, but you need to check out Ball State."
Yeah.
They were like they were very like, "Hey, we have good stuff here, but like you need to go to Ball State and learn." And Chris Taylor, who is still there and has led that phenomenal program, Ball State Sports Link since its inception, allowed me to really learn day to day of what it truly is to be what you said, Joe. It's to be a storyteller, and that's being able to use words and paint a picture to also being able, hey, when you get a camera in your hands, what are some creative ways that you can do it? So, what's the best way to do it? I know it seems very basic and straightforward, but you have to get reps. And
Mhm.
the more reps you get, the better you're going to get. And you got to be able to be willing to take that risk that, hey, some of this stuff, like there's still some of my high school stuff that are archived on YouTube that I wish I could go delete. I probably should go and delete.
Leave it up
Um,
there. No.
yeah, but it is. It's like you go back in time and you remember, man, I remember when I thought this was a work of art.
Yeah.
And and then you go back and you go, oh my goodness, this can be a little cringeworthy. But you have to be willing to go out there and take those type of risks. So yeah, like with any industry, are there things that you are born with that you are blessed with? There is no question, yes. But my dad was a police officer. My mom, worked in corporate with Cummins Incorporated in Columbus, Indiana. It wasn't like either of my parents were blessed in this industry either. It was just one that I fell in love with, wanted to make a priority. And I think with anything, if you make it a priority and you want to learn it, amazing things can happen.
Yeah, it's great. Any part of you as a kiddo think about going law enforcement or corporate, or was it always, I know you said this
No,
happened
oh
pretty
no.
early.
Like my brother was probably more, he didn't become in either of those fields either. He probably had more of the law enforcement itch if he wanted to scratch it. But for me, you know, seeing my dad work his way up to police chief in Columbus, Indiana, which is relatively a small town, not as small
Mhm.
as Carbondale.
Yeah,
But I saw the stresses of the job, even though I was young. My dad retired from the police force when I was in middle school, and getting ready to start high school, and just seeing the stresses of that job, and that was stressful then.
sure.
Let alone really now in kind of the day and age we are, and even more stress that's on those positions. But to answer your question, no, I never had the itch. My dad probably always wondered like, what the heck is my youngest son gonna do? But luckily, I avoided the law enforcement area.
Probably a smart move.
Yes.
Um, and we'll probably lose people at this point out of boredom, but in terms of like journalism, because I mean, everything is changing so fast and the industry is completely different than when back in my day I was in newspapers and that whole thing. I don't feel like leadership saw things coming quick enough, especially in print. Do you keep up with that stuff? You mentioned trying to try new things and keep people engaged. I mean, you have to do so much to keep this whole population engaged, shorter attention spans, all that good stuff. Do you pay attention to kind of the state of journalism? Is that something you think about?
Well, you have to pay attention to it, Joe. And like this past year, again, made more of an emphasis of, yeah, look, there are a lot of our fans who I'm sure take in our broadcast still with River Radio and whenever they can pick up a radio. But I know there's a lot more that are finding us through the Varsity Network app.
Hmm.
Uh, of those that even picked this up, we did it more with baseball than necessarily basketball and football, but for baseball, we started streaming not just to X, but also Facebook as well.
Yep,
And look, everyone may not be able to find a radio, but for the most part, some, grandmas and grandpas and some of the older community, no doubt, is on Facebook. They can find a way to still get to the game.
yep,
X, no question, more for our athletes and probably college age, my age group, for people to still try to find games. Like the list of those who probably listen from the start when we go on the air for pregame to our very final interview is very small. but there are still times throughout games where people will just try to catch and tune in whenever they can. And I've always been of the belief, Joe, you have to adapt and find and give as many options as you can,
Yep.
uh, more than just one. And to kind of your point with journalism, uh, it's still to me such a. I took a lot of journalism classes when I was at Ball State, part of the news track, and getting my degree. And even though like there were some covering more news stories compared to sports wasn't my cup of tea. It was essential and just figuring out, hey, you know what, when you're doing an interview, whether it's the local mayor or a local officer or the starting point guard for your basketball team, there
Yeah.
are still essential ways that you have to structure your story and more go about it and attack it to figure out what's the nuts and bolts we're doing. Um, and you just can't be the old school, just show up and cover the games.
Yep.
There has to be more ways where you can expand, even if it's a little bit out of your area. Like I would not call myself like a high level videographer or creative or whatever way you want to do it. It's just, hey, what's a way where we can just tell more people about now Saluki athletics or my
Yeah.
past of Sycamore athletics or wherever I've been. Um, you have to evolve, and like you said, when you watch those other industries, if you don't evolve, and especially evolve as the time's going, but even trying to stay a step ahead, you're going to get behind. And once you get behind, Joe, it's really hard to catch up.
Yeah, especially in that sector, I think you're right. And there was just this arrogance phase I felt like where you got to start going to the people a little bit more instead of expecting them to come to you. So I think all those different variations of the content, like you mentioned, I think that works really well. So last question, Luke, unless you want to throw in anything else for this, but I'm trying to ask people kind of who their favorite underdog is. That's kind of the name of this whole indie publication we've started. We just love shining spotlights on these student athletes. We're in kind of a news desert ourselves, you know that. I grew up as a kiddo watching the White Sox, big White Sox fan, unfortunately, but guys like Robin Ventura, Joey Cora, Ozzie Guillen, they were not big superstars like Frank Thomas or Albert Bell. But man, I've always loved that story, and everybody loves an underdog story. So it doesn't have to be a Saluki, but do you have any
Yeah,
players that you watched or covered or as a kid watched growing up that you thought, man, I just like their style?
man, that's a really good question. Because as you said, Joe, there's what's special about it, and especially if I go just during my time being in college athletics,
Yeah,
um, when you truly get to know the backstories of individuals, that's what makes it really
yeah,
special. So I would say for me, probably, and it's a story that's still being told too. I'd say probably the greatest underdog story I've ever been around or been associated with was a football player at Indiana State that I was lucky to get to know really well. His name was Jonas Griffith. He ended up being All-American linebacker, phenomenal linebacker at Indiana State. He's ultimately made it to the NFL. He's going through some adversity right now in terms of battling through some injuries. But he was a highly recruited. He was from Louisville, grew up in Louisville, came from a very big family, didn't have, all the bells and whistles
yeah,
growing up. Went to Shawnee High School, not one of the more prolific high schools in the area. But if I remember right, I think they had somewhere along the lines of it was a multi-year losing streak. We'll leave it at that. And Jonas will have great success there, but he builds on that, gets to Indiana State, didn't play right away, but then ultimately becomes just one of the all-time really great linebackers to play at Indiana State. Again, went undrafted. His senior year was COVID, all of that chaos that kind of
yeah,
ensued, and ultimately worked his way up to being on an NFL roster. Unfortunately for him, just the last 2 years, I believe, he's had to have an ACL, which is not an easy injury to come back from. But he would probably, I don't think probably, he would be the number one underdog story for me of just getting to know his family, getting to know his brothers, his background, really coming from absolutely nothing.
oh,
And then when you get to the level of status that he is, to not change his DNA, to still be the very approachable, loving, caring individual that he is. He's not just one of the all-time underdog stories, but he's one of the all-time just tremendous people. So for me, Jonas is always easy.
Yep.
for me to go to. But like you said, there are so many because I know there are many that I can't really grasp onto right now that I'm thinking of that I know if someone was like, oh, hey, what about so and so? Because that's what made Indiana State and Southern honestly similar. And both schools I have a lot of respect for because it's not like you're always getting the cream of the crop
No.
recruits. There's always going to be in terms of those development pieces that you got to because you have to. It's just where we're at in the college landscape. But man, it's what makes these jobs so much fun because when you get to cover those stories, they are really really special.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the whole mid-major mystique and like the chip on the shoulder thing. I think it's all underdogs, at these mid-major schools. So I love it. Well, man, look, I really appreciate it. Anything you think I'm missing, you want to get out there? Anything you're working on?
Man, Joe, there's a lot going on this summer, but no, it's been good. Just, really do appreciate the time. Just most of all, just appreciate this, Saluki Nation as a whole for being so welcoming and not just welcoming, but engaging. That's what has been, and I'm sure you can speak to it too with the underdog is it doesn't matter what it is. We all know that Saluki basketball is not probably, it is the center of attention, and it's
Yep.
what our fan base is craving at in July, just like it is, especially once we get in the season. But they love anything and everything Salukis. And that's what's been rewarding is it's
Yep.
look, if there wasn't a lot of ROI, return on investment when it comes to these different stories and video features, then I wouldn't have a job, Joe. So luckily, our fan base is not just been very welcoming. It's an engaging fan base, and it's what makes it a lot of fun to be able to do this job.
Love it. Well, I appreciate you letting us flip the script on you. I know a lot of people appreciate your work. So thanks for taking the time, Luke, and I'm sure we'll chat soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Joe.
Awesome. Thanks, Luke.